Hello, we're just waiting for the PowerPoint to load here. Okay, so this lecture is on evidence of evolution. I believe we started this in one of the Earth through Time sections, but we didn't get too far. So we'll just start from the beginning. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about fossils, classification of organisms, biological evidence, and examples of missing link fossils as evidence of evolution. So here, this figure, we see the basic tree of vertebrate evolution. So we see the early in the Paleozoic, the Cambrian, which complex animals which come on the scene. We have the first vertebrates, animals with a backbone. And moving forward in time, we have the first vertebrates are jawless fish, which there are still some around today. Then we have jawed fishes, which include cartilaginous fish like sharks, skates, and rays, and bony fish, which are most other fishes you think of, like cod, goldfish, anything else. And then from them comes amphibians, and then from amphibians evolved reptiles, and reptiles evolved mammals, and also birds from reptiles. So this is basically a map that describes which vertebrates evolved from which and when. The question is how do we know this, right? This is a long time ago, and how do we know that this is the story of vertebrate evolution? Well, the answer is using all of these evidence of evolution, including the fossil record, classification, and missing link fossils. So we're first going to quickly talk about fossils, what they are and what we can learn from them. So there are two types of fossils. They are body fossils and trace fossils. Here, the skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus rex, that's considered to be a body fossil because it is the preserved remains of the actual structure or body of the organism. So most body fossils include either shells, bones, teeth, and very rarely frozen or mummified soft tissue. And then we have down here these footprints, which are considered to be trace fossils. Okay, so they're not actual remnants of the organism itself, but traces of the organism. Okay, so footprints, burrows, any of that those would be considered to be trace fossils. So we have body fossils and trace fossils. And so of body fossils, we most consist of hard body parts, especially shells of marine organisms, because in a marine environment, organisms are much more likely to be quickly buried by sediment and be preserved. Organisms that have mostly soft tissue, like jellyfish or worms, they're much less likely to be fossilized than organisms with hard structures because that soft tissue decomposes very rapidly. And terrestrial vertebrates are also less likely to be fossilized than marine organisms because the chances of terrestrial vertebrate, so a land-dwelling vertebrate, say like a Tyrannosaurus rex, dying and quickly being covered by sediment and all the conditions for fossilization being met are not very big. But there were a lot of Tyrannosaurus rexes that lived on this planet, and so though the chances of any individual being fossilized were small, because so many of them lived, there are many fossils of them that exist. I think there's 20 known, for example, 20 known nearly complete fossilized skeletons of Tyrannosaurus rex, for example. There are some dinosaurs and other terrestrial vertebrates in which there's only one known specimen that has ever been discovered of them. So there could be many terrestrial vertebrates that lived on this planet that we have not yet discovered fossils of, and so we don't know they exist as of right now. So what we can learn from fossils, fossils, they provide basically a record of what life was like in the past, and this acts as evidence for evolution. It shows a sequence of different groups of organisms appearing throughout time, and we're able to trace through time these features that are passed on from ancestors to descendants. And that allows us to put together these trees of evolution that are called cladograms, which I'll introduce next. So basically, we have, in this example, a tapir, a rhinoceros, and a horse. And if you follow the branch back, that shows their evolutionary lineage. And so these three organisms share a common ancestor, which is this ancestor right here, which then branched off from this way and then this way. And this organism, then it diverged again, branching off to descend to rhinoceroses and tapirs, while this ancestor descended to horses, in particular zebra. And so, in this case, the tapir and the rhinoceros would be more closely related because they share a more recent common ancestor. And so the tapir is more closely related to a rhinoceros than it is a horse, as it shares a more recent common ancestor. We could also see some pretty dramatic examples of evolution in the fossil record. So, for example, we talked about whales in our last lecture, how whales' ancestors were terrestrial mammals like Pakicetus 50 million years ago, had the nostril at the end of the snout. And as we look through the fossil record as time goes on, we see that nostril migrate from the end of the snout to the middle of the snout, and then from middle of the skull to the top of the skull, as the descendants of Pakicetus became more and more equipped for an strictly aquatic life. So, another more evidence for evolution is the classification of organisms. So, this is kind of what the cladograms we just looked at, that one diagram we just looked at, kind of derived from this classification. So, classification is whenever we label organisms in this nested system of classification. So, and each layer of classification has particular characteristics associated with it. And so you can think of classification as a nested pattern of similarities. This is called the natural system of classification, also known as the Linnaean system of classification, because Carolus Linnaeus developed it. And so this consists of many layers. So we have the kingdom is the most broad, and phylum, subphylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And as you go from kingdom to species, the traits become more and more specific. Okay, in this example, we have the natural classification of Canis latrans, which is a coyote. And the most specific label is the species, and that's latrans. And if we start kingdom, coyotes are in the kingdom Animalia. These are all multicellular organisms who have a nucleus with a cell, so eukaryotic cell. They reproduce sexually, and they ingest preformed organic molecules. Another word for food. Okay, they eat food. And so there's a large number of organisms that fall within that kingdom, right? Not just coyotes, ourselves included, cats, whales, starfish, a lot of different organisms. Okay, so it's very broad. Then we have phylum Chordata. So these are all animals, because this phylum is within Animalia. So all animals that possess a notochord. Okay, so basically a dorsal nerve, a nerve that runs along the length of the body. So this would include obviously coyote, human, whales, cats, most vertebrates, but would not include starfish, because starfish don't have that notochord. Then there's a subphylum of chordates called Vertebrata. So these are vertebrates, and those are all chordates in which the notochord is surrounded by segmented bones. Vertebra, the form a vertebral column, or what we also know as a spine. So most chordates are vertebrates. Okay, and then so a particular class of vertebrates is Mammalia, which coyotes are found in, which we're also found in Mammalia. So these are all warm-blooded vertebrates with hair or fur and mammary glands. And coyotes find themselves in a particular order of mammals called carnivora. This is all mammals with teeth specialized for a diet of meat. Okay, so we are not in this order. So this tells us that our evolutionary ancestor with coyotes was some mammal, not a vertebrate, not just any animal, but in particular it was a mammal, because this is where our classification deviates from that of a coyote. So a coyote descended from a group of mammals that would become the carnivores, those mammals with teeth specialized for a strictly meat diet. Then there's a particular family of carnivores, the Canidae. These are the dog-like carnivores, including domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, and foxes. So there's other families of carnivores like bears, seals, and so forth. And so, for example, dog is more closely related to a bear and a cat because they are in the same order, carnivore, than they are related to us because we're in a different order. Then we have genus Canis. This is made up mostly of related species, including domestic dogs, wolves, and coyotes. So this would, like, say, exclude jackals and hyenas and all those other dogs. And then we have the species Latrans consists of similar individuals in nature that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So here we have the definition of a species. A species is a population or a group of organisms that can produce viable or fertile offspring. So what it means to have produce fertile offspring is that if two organisms, if they sexually reproduce, their offspring itself can sexually reproduce. Okay, it can have its own babies. Where if you have two species that reproduce that are not, two organisms that reproduce that are not from the same species, which typically doesn't happen in nature, but people sometimes facilitate it in captivity. Like, for example, a lion and a tiger producing what's known as a liger. So that's a hybrid. And because it's the product of two individuals from different species, a liger cannot reproduce itself. It's sterile. Okay. Same thing with a mule. A mule is a hybrid between a horse and a donkey. So a mule, being the offspring of two individuals from different species, horses and donkeys, mules are sterile, not viable, not fertile. So here we can see we have four organisms: humans, polar bears, a blue jay, and a crocodile, and their respective natural classification. So we all share a common ancestor that was an animal. Okay, so these four organisms are more closely related to each other than they are to, say, a plant or bacteria. They all come from the same phylum, chordates. Okay, so they all have dorsal nerves. So they're all more closely related to each other than they are to animals that aren't chordates, like a starfish or a sea urchin. Now, here's where they differ. The human and the polar bear are in the class Mammalia, where the blue jay is in class Aves and crocodile class Reptilia. So that means that since humans and the polar bears share the same class, but these don't, it means that humans and polar bears are more closely related to each other. So a human is more closely related to a polar bear than it is a blue jay or a crocodile. And a polar bear is more closely related to a human than it is a blue jay or a crocodile. But then here we see even humans and polar bears split. Their most recent common ancestor is some ancestral mammal, where from it descended primates and carnivores, and so the order primates, which we descend from, and the order carnivores, which polar bears descend from. So you can see that's where our common ancestry splits. Some ancestral mammal that from it evolved primates and the carnivores. And so if we map out these nested similarities, we create these cladograms, which I introduced before. So here's a cladogram here, and so we basically just graphically represent these nested similarities, okay? And this kind of maps out the evolutionary relationships. So for the example here, we have hagfish, lamprey, cartilaginous fish, like sharks, skates, and rays, ray-finned fish, lobe-finned fish, lungfish, amphibians, and amniotes. Okay, so if we look, all right, so we have these boxes. Here's one box, here's another box, here's another box, and if you see, each of these branches goes into a new box. Or most of these branches go into a box. So, for example, this branch right here, coming up right here, let me change the pen color so we can see it red. So this branch right here, it represents all animals that lead into this big square, which are all animals that have a skull. So this branch is all animals that have a skull. So every animal that descends from this branch, which includes everything, has a skull. Alright? So now it splits, right? There's the hagfish over here and everything else over here. Well, this branch right here represents all animals that have a backbone and a skull. So obviously it has a skull, but it has a backbone, which means the hagfish does not have a backbone. Okay, so all the organisms, all the animals that stem from organisms, I should say, in general, that stem from this branch have a backbone. Okay, and so then it splits again. You have them that way and this way, and so this branch represents all animals that. Where are we? Oh, that just splits into cartilaginous fish. Okay, and then it splits again. So that's not its own particular group. That's that splits based off something that's not labeled here. Then this branch it represents all organisms that animals that have a swim bladder or lungs, a backbone, and a skull. Okay, what that means is that ray-finned fish, lobe-finned fish, lungfish, amphibians, amniotes, they have a skull, a backbone, and lungs or a swim bladder. And so these organisms up here do not have lungs or a swim bladder. Okay, only these ones do that stem from this branch right here. Then the branch splits again, and so this branch represents all animals that have not only a skull, backbone, and a swim bladder or lungs, but also have 4 limbs. So these organisms that stem from this branch have 4 limbs, and these organisms do not. So ray-finned fish, lobe-finned fish, and lungfish do not have 4 limbs. And of these organisms of 4 limbs, there's a split again, and these organisms are amniotes, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Amniotes are animals with 4 membranes around their eggs to keep them watertight. And we call those membranes the amniotic sac. So that's why they're called amniotes. Okay, so these organisms, they share all these commons. They have a skull, they have a backbone, they have a swim bladder or lungs, they have 4 limbs, and they're amniotes. Okay, so as you trace back, they have all these features. Where if you trace back these organisms, they do not have 4 limbs, or they're not amniotes, but they do have a backbone, a swim bladder, lungs, a backbone, and a skull. All right, so as we said, these cladograms represent this nested pattern of similarities. So, for example, vertebrates all have backbones. Mammals are all animals with backbones that are warm-blooded, have hair or fur, and mammary glands. And at the genus level, organisms share most characteristics, but there are differences between organisms at the same genus that make them individual species. And it's only at the species level can they interbreed. So now we're going to look at some biological evidence of evolution. Okay, so there's a lot of evidence supporting evolution that comes from not only classification but embryology, genetics, biochemistry, molecular biology, and present-day small-scale evolution. So, and so some examples of these embryology, we could see the stages of evolution in the development of an embryo of different organisms. Genetics, we can see genetic markers that we share with other organisms, and that we can basically create those same cladograms using genetic markers and so forth. Some of the most compelling evidence is found in anatomy, which is pretty easy to see. We're going to look at some examples. Okay, so the first anatomical evidence of evolution is what are called homologous structures. So homologous structures are structures, they're basically an example of divergent evolution. They're structures that share the same blueprint, so the same basic fundamental design, but have slight variations to those basic designs to suit the needs of the organism's environment. So for example, the human, horse, cat, bat, bird, whale, they all have the same basic skeletal structure of their forelimb as reptiles do. And this isn't a coincidence because mammals and birds descend from reptiles. They evolved from reptiles, so they inherited this basic structure for the forelimb from reptiles. But you can see that that forelimb is designed slightly different in each of these organisms to suit their environment. So evolution has shaped them for their particular environments, but that same basic structure is there because it was inherited by their ancestors, the reptiles. And so you can see we have the humerus, the ulna and radius, the wrist bones, and the digits. And so you can see those same bones in the human. In the horse, actually the horse only has one digit. It lost all the other digits. So this is the actual wrist bones here, and this is all the one digit of the horse. The cat, the bat, the digits have been repurposed to hold skin to form a wing. A bird, this is actually its digit right here, but it flies using feathers. And then the whale, these more what's the word? Not distal, but closer to the body. Proximal. I believe it's proximal. The proximal bones of the forelimb, like the humerus, are shortened, but the digits have been significantly elongated to form a flipper. So it's a long but wide. Alright, so those are homologous structures. Another example of evolution demonstrates convergent evolution, not divergent, and those are analogous structures. So analogous structures, they do not indicate common ancestry like homologous structures do. What they do indicate is that organisms are doing the same thing. Organisms from different evolutionary ancestry are being selected upon by the similar factors in nature. So for example, a bird, which evolved from reptiles, a bat, which is a mammal which evolved separately from reptiles, and an insect, like a fly, which is very distantly related as well. They all have developed, in this example, structures to fly. But these structures do not have the same, they're not structured the same, right? So the way that the bird developed the ability to fly is to evolve feathers that grow from the wings, where the bat, it has skin in between these supported by these long digits, where the fly doesn't have a skeletal structure at all to form its wings. So analogous structure does not indicate descendant from common ancestors. These structures are similar and may serve the same purpose, but they are not similar in structure and development. So they're analogous because they serve the same purpose, but they have different evolutionary ancestry. Unlike the homologous structure, which we saw the homologous structures serve different purposes, like the paddle of the whale, the wing of the bat, and the hand of the human, but they come from the same evolutionary ancestry. And then we have vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are remnants of structures that were fully functional in an organism's ancestor. So for some examples are the dew claw of the dog. So this claw on the forelimb of a dog. Dog doesn't use it, but dog's ancestors used to climb trees, and that dew claw was helpful in descending the tree. The wisdom teeth in humans as an ancestral vestigial structure. In the pelvis in whales, there's also a vestigial structure. You can consider the tailbone of, excuse me one second.